I left Music Mafia Radio because things were getting a little too busy around the family area and things like that. And I was wanting to spend more time off of the computer, spend more time with my family, spend more time doing other things, and everybody needs a break. Everybody needs a break, and everybody needs to do something different sometimes. So I took off there. It was also around that time that my mother, she was just getting out of surgery for cancer, and she had some really, really bad cancer. I'm not going to go into the details because I'm not going to gross you guys out, but she had some really, really bad cancer. And she survived the surgery, obviously, and was to go on a 6-treatment chemotherapy program. Now, chemo has killed a member of my family before. The actual chemotherapy has killed a member of my family. And that was a risk that I suppose she was willing to take. That was a risk that the family was willing to take to make her better. And there was assessments and things done, and they came to understand that she could take the chemotherapy. So she goes in and she does the treatments, and I'm telling you, she was so brave and positive. She lost her hair, she lost a lot of weight, but she was always so nice and wonderful and loving when we came to see her. She could have just said, guys, I don't feel like it. I don't feel like going to see you guys. I don't feel like getting out of bed. I don't feel like doing anything. I don't want anybody to see me like this. Guys, you guys, thanks, but no thanks. And so she would continue with the chemo, and the last 2 treatments were very rough on her. She had side effects, complications. She was very sick from the last 2 treatments. However, when it came down to it, she was finished. March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, she was finished with her treatment and still putting forth a brave face. Not feeling very well, but still putting forth a brave face and doing just wonderfully. Her prognosis was good. And then a week later, she was rushed to the hospital. Her main condition, the condition that's given her so much grief and so much pain, other than the cancers that she's gone through, is COPD. She was diagnosed in 2009 after a trip to the emergency room where she almost died. They basically looked at her lungs and said, well, you have COPD. And she was a lifelong smoker, and she was not the best eater or whatever, and not the most active, certainly. But she still continued to live life as fully as she could with this disease. She was on oxygen for a while. She was limited in what she could do, but she still did crafts. She still did handiwork. She still did great things. There it goes again. While she was gone, or while she was, not able to do things physically, she was able to do other things. So the real underlying cause of a lot of her distress was COPD. Even though she'd beaten cancer twice, COPD was just really the bane of her existence. And she kept smoking throughout it. Now, I'm not one to preach. I'm not one to tell anybody, guys, you shouldn't smoke, guys, you shouldn't do anything. I believe anybody should be able to do whatever the fuck they want to, as long as it's only themselves they're hurting and not someone else. And that's just what I believe. I believe that people have the right to fuck up their own lives. I believe that people should have the right to hurt themselves if they want to. If they feel that the high that they get and the benefit that they get from said items is worth more than the risks, then they should be able to do it. That's why I never bothered her about stopping smoking. I never bothered her about it because I kind of knew that, well, she was going to do it anyway. She was going to do it anyway, and that's it, Gone this long with warnings and everything else, There's a point where you just got to let someone live their life, and that's what she did. Or that's what we did. We let her live her life. Now, fast forward from 2009 to present day, first time I saw my mom after she was rushed to the hospital this most recent time, she was on a ventilator. She was out of commission, as you would say. She was basically drugged up to the point where she wasn't around. She was basically out, and finally, she was on a ventilator. She had a machine breathing for her. She had intravenous feeding. I mean, she was on life support for all intents and purposes. But the folks at Kaiser Permanente, and I know there are a lot of people who don't think that Kaiser Permanente is a good provider, but I got to tell you, these folks were very, very kind and caring and gracious, and they were absolutely phenomenal with her in her treatment, in keeping us abreast of the situation, being honest yet being compassionate, and that's a hard line to straddle, especially when you're talking about someone who is possibly terminally ill. That's a hard line to straddle, and they did it very well. So they kept her going for about 3 weeks, and then they realized that they couldn't keep the trach, or they couldn't keep the ventilator in her, so they had to install a trach. Tracheotomy basically is installed when a stoma is implanted in the neck, which means that there's a small ring that's implanted into the trachea, and that can either help someone breathe on their own if they can, or in my mom's case, they hooked up the machine to the trachea so that it could breathe for her. And we saw all this go down. Now, with the trachea came improvement. My mom woke out of sedation. She was alive, aware. She couldn't talk. She was being fed through her stomach. But you could just tell in someone's eyes that they are alive. You can just tell that what's the word I'm looking for? The sparkle is there. The will to live is there. You can tell in her eyes that it was there. And she was looking frankly bored. She was looking bored at the hospital. I would go see her and she would just look so bored. And I would just tell her, hey, you're getting better. Just follow the doctor's orders. Listen to them. We're here for you. Just don't worry about that. Just focus on getting well. Yet, in typical family fashion, because my great-grandfather, when he went to the hospital, once spilled his meal all over a nurse because he didn't like the electrodes in him. He didn't like any of the stuff that was attached to him. He didn't like any of it. So he was a difficult patient. My grandmother was a difficult patient. And my mother was a difficult patient. She was fighting her treatment because think about this, folks. You breathe every day. Since you're alive and you're listening to this show, you breathe every single day. You breathe every single day, and you don't even give it a second thought. You don't even think about your breath. You don't even think about what you're doing. You're respirating. You're not supposed to think about it. And she was having that done for her. So yeah, it's a difficult. Breathing is a difficult habit to put down. Let me tell you, breathing is a very difficult habit to put down. Breathing is hard to just stop. You know what I mean? Breathing is really hard to just stop. And I mean, try and hold your breath, and you maybe last a minute, 2 minutes. Maybe if you're a real fuckboy and you try to just hold your breath to see how long you're going to do it, you're going to pass out, and then you're going to start breathing again. It is that automatic. And yet, that was taken away from my mom. So yeah, she was fighting a natural type of thing that you usually don't have to even think about. So that must have been really difficult. Have a machine breathe for you, jamming air into your lungs in a regular beat, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That has to be some of the most awful types of things to go through. When your mind is sound, when you know what's going on, and yet your body is dying. Think about that. That is what ALS patients have to go through. That is what quadriplegics, these people who don't have use of their arms and legs, who have machines do their every will, do everything that they were supposed to do, that they were given the ability to do by being born. Think about that. She was completely helpless. She's being fed through her stomach, and she was breathing. She had a tube breathing for her, but she had hope. They moved her out of intensive care. They moved her into what they called step down. And she was getting better. Her color was coming back. They had drained all the fluids from her body, all the fluids that had accumulated, all of the drugs that had accumulated in her body. They had drained. They'd gotten rid of. And they made sure that she was completely drug-free. She was in pain. Imagine if you had a fucking tube in your neck. She was in pain. Absolutely. But she never complained. Now, granted, you smartasses out there would be like, oh, she couldn't talk either. But yeah, you didn't see her wince. You didn't see her blink like she's in pain. You know what I mean? Like she had that kind of wince. You didn't see that. She didn't write down that she was feeling poorly. She couldn't write. She was in bed for so damn long that she couldn't write. She couldn't move her legs. She couldn't move her arms. She was in bed for so damn long. And yet there was hope. There was hope. And then we got some good news. Mid-April, she was moved to a rehabilitation center. Now, this place also specializes in hospice, so I'm like, oh, great. But no, this was rehab. The plan was to get her lungs strong enough so that she could breathe on her own. And while they were getting strong, they would start to exercise her arms, exercise her legs, exercise her neck, exercise those extremities that had gone dead. That was what they were doing. And that was what the plan was. Fast forward to Mother's Day. I go in and I see her. She's looking a little, tired. Her eyes, the eyes that had that same spark of life before, were a little bit dimmer, but she was in and out of sleep. I took it as she's tired. This is hard. It's hard when you're just sitting there. There's a machine breathing for you. You're not eating. You're basically a living head. That's rough. I can't even imagine what it is to be like that. Because I breathe, I live, I walk, I can't imagine any of this. I got her some things our children made and dropped them off with her and sat with her for about 2 hours. I showed her pictures. I showed her pictures of the kids the last couple of weeks, last month. She smiled. She smiled weakly, but she smiled. She made little mouth gestures of like, oh, like, that's so cute. She laughed. She laughed. She chuckled. She laughed. She was weak, but she laughed. And I held her hand. It was warm.